You know that feeling when you find something and you can't explain why, but every instinct in your body tells you to put it back down and walk away. I didn't listen to that feeling. I wish I had. It was the summer of 2019, and I was helping my uncle clear out his storage unit in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He'd been renting the thing for almost 15 years and never once stepped foot inside it after the first month. You know how it goes, you rent a unit thinking you'll sort through it later, and later never comes. So finally, that July, we went in together and started digging through the mess. Most of it was what you'd expect. Old furniture, cardboard boxes gone soft with humidity, a broken exercise bike still wrapped in plastic. We were about 2 hours in, sweating through our shirts when I found the camera. It was sitting on top of a wooden crate in the back corner, almost like someone had set it there deliberately. A vintage camcorder, one of those chunky early 2000s models with the fold-out screen. The outside casing was dusty but not damaged. The brand label had half peeled off. I picked it up and it was heavier than I expected. I called over to my uncle, asked him if it was his. He walked over, looked at it for about 3 seconds and shook his head. Said he'd never seen it before in his life. That was strange. You'd think a locked storage unit would only have your stuff inside it. But these old facilities, especially the ones that have been around forever, sometimes swap units around during renovations, and things get misplaced. That was the explanation we landed on. Neither one of us thought much of it after that. I asked if I could keep it. He shrugged and said sure. I took it home that evening and spent about 20 minutes tracking down a compatible battery charger online. Ordered it, waited 3 days, and when it finally arrived, I plugged the camera in and let it charge overnight. The next morning, I turned it on. The screen flickered, went blue, and then settled. The battery was holding. And then I noticed the small icon in the corner of the screen, the one that tells you there's still footage on the tape inside. My first thought was that it would be something boring, a kid's birthday party, a family vacation, maybe nothing at all, just static. I hit play. The first few minutes were exactly what I expected, a backyard cookout somewhere, a man I didn't recognize flipping burgers on a grill, a woman laughing off camera, a dog running through a sprinkler, normal, completely normal. And then the footage jumped, not like a technical glitch, more like someone had stopped recording and then started again. The date stamp in the corner changed. Same location, same backyard, but now it was night. The image was grainy, lit only by what looked like a single outdoor light mounted above a back door. The camera was sitting still, propped up on something aimed at the back of a house. For the first 30 seconds, nothing moved, just the backyard, just the dark. Then a man walked into the frame. He came from the side of the house, not the door. He was wearing a dark jacket and gloves, and he moved slowly along the exterior wall, pausing at each window. At the first window, he just looked. At the second window, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled something out, and held it up against the glass. I couldn't make out what it was. Then he tried the window. It didn't open. He moved to the back door. He crouched down. And for almost 4 minutes, he worked at the lock, patient, methodical, no rushing. My stomach had completely dropped by this point. I was sitting at my kitchen table at 8 in the morning, completely still, watching this on a camera I'd found in an abandoned storage unit in Louisiana. The door opened. He went inside. The camera kept recording. The backyard was empty again, silent. Just that outdoor light casting a pale yellow glow over the grass. He came back out 11 minutes later. He was carrying something, a bag it looked like, small and dark, and he walked back the way he came, along the side of the house, and disappeared out of the frame. The footage ended about 30 seconds after that. I sat there for a long time before I moved. The first thing I did was go back and look at the date stamp. The cookout footage was from June 14th, 2008. The nighttime footage was from 2 days later, June 16th, 2008. I looked up break-ins in Baton Rouge from that period. It took a while, but I eventually found a local newspaper archive that mentioned a string of burglaries in a residential neighborhood during the summer of 2008. Several homes, one of them on a street I recognized, not far from where my uncle's storage facility was. One of the articles mentioned that the suspect was never caught. I called the Baton Rouge Police Department the same afternoon, explained what I had. They were skeptical at first. A 15-year-old camcorder tape about a cold case doesn't exactly inspire urgency, but after I described the footage in detail, they asked me to bring it in. I drove it down there that evening, handed it over, gave a full statement. I don't know what came of it after that. They never followed up with me and I didn't push. I told myself that was enough, that handing it over was the right thing to do and whatever happened next wasn't mine to carry. But here's what I think about sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. The camera was inside a locked storage unit that my uncle said wasn't his. Nobody could explain how it got there. And when I think about that footage, the fact that the camera was set up deliberately, propped and aimed, already recording when that man came around the corner, I keep landing on the same question. Who set up the camera? If that man was the burglar, why would he film himself? It doesn't make sense. And if someone else had set it up, a neighbor, a witness, someone who suspected something, why didn't they ever go to the police? Why did that camera end up in a storage unit, sealed away for over a decade? I've never found an answer. If you've ever found something that wasn't yours and made the mistake of looking too closely, you already know how this ends. I was 26, living alone in a rented house in rural Ohio. A two-bedroom place with old hardwood floors and a landlord who only showed up twice a year to collect cash. I liked it that way. Quiet. No neighbors close enough to bother me. Just me, my dog Biscuit, and whatever I could find to keep myself busy on weekends. That's how I started going to estate sales. It started as a hobby, honestly. You'd be surprised what people leave behind when they die. Old furniture, boxes of paperback novels, kitchen stuff still in the packaging. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just liked digging through other people's lives. There was something weirdly peaceful about it. The sale where everything started was held on a Saturday morning about 40 minutes outside of Columbus. A farmhouse that had been sitting empty for almost 2 years after the owner passed. The family was selling everything, and I mean everything. Closet contents, garage tools, even half-open cleaning products under the kitchen sink. I spent about an hour walking through the place before I found it. It was sitting in a cardboard box at the back of a bedroom closet, wrapped loosely in a gray flannel shirt. A camcorder. One of those old Sony Handycams from the late 90s, the kind that used the small cassette tapes. Heavy, solid. The plastic casing was scuffed, but when I popped open the battery compartment, it looked clean inside. No corrosion. Someone had taken care of it. I paid $8 for it. The woman running the sale didn't even look up when she took my money. I got it home, dug out an old phone charger that had the same adapter port, didn't work. Then found a compatible battery on an electronics resale site for $11. It arrived 3 days later. I charged it overnight, clicked it in, and the camera turned on. The little screen glowed green, battery icon, date flashing, and a small symbol in the corner that I didn't immediately recognize. A tape icon. There was already a cassette inside. I didn't think much of it. I figured I'd find old birthday footage, maybe Christmas. Some family's home video that had been sitting in that closet since 2001. I pressed play. For the first few seconds it was just static. Then the image stabilized. It was a room. Small, cluttered. Shot at night based on the darkness outside the window in the background. A man was sitting in a chair directly across from the camera. He wasn't talking at first. He was just sitting there completely still with his hands folded in his lap, staring into the lens. He looked like he was in his 40s, plain face, short hair. He was wearing a collared shirt, buttoned all the way up. Then he started speaking. He said, and I'm paraphrasing because this is what I remember, he said that what he was about to show was documentation, that he had been careful, that he wanted there to be a record in case anything happened to him. His voice was completely flat, no emotion, like someone reading off a grocery list. I felt the first real chill when he stood up and carried the camera out of the room. He walked it through the house, slow, deliberate. He wasn't narrating anymore, just filming. The hallway, the bathroom, the kitchen. And then he opened a door, a side door, like one that would lead to a utility room, and he filmed what was inside. I stopped the tape. I sat there for probably a full minute just staring at the paused image on that little green screen. Biscuit was at my feet, and I remember reaching down and just gripping the fur on his back without thinking. What I saw in that room didn't make sense to me at first, not because it was graphic. It wasn't. It was the arrangement of things that didn't make sense. There were photographs pinned to the wall in a grid, dozens of them, black and white, all of the same exterior location. A house, but not the farmhouse where I bought the camera. A different one, smaller, with a distinctive bay window I didn't recognize. And below the photographs were handwritten notes on loose paper, organized in columns, connected by lines drawn in red marker. Names, dates, times. It looked exactly like what you see in crime dramas when they show an investigator's evidence board. Except this wasn't a TV set. This was real. This was in someone's house. In a room they had deliberately set up and then filmed. I pressed play again. The man came back on screen. He sat back down in the chair. He looked directly into the camera and said he had been watching for 11 months. That the patterns were consistent, that he was certain now, and that if something happened before he could act, he wanted this tape found. The recording ended there. I'm not someone who panics easily. I sat with it for a while, told myself maybe it was nothing. Maybe the guy was paranoid. Maybe he was making some kind of personal documentary about a neighbor dispute and it just looked worse than it was. But I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. The family had said the farmhouse sat empty for 2 years after the owner died. If that was true, then whoever filmed this tape hadn't been the person who owned the house. Or if he had, he died not long after making it. Before he could act. Before he could do whatever it was he was planning to do. And I still had no idea who the man in the video was, or whose house was in those photographs, or whether any of this had ever been reported to anyone. I drove to the county sheriff's office the next morning and handed over the camera. I explained where I bought it and what was on the tape. The deputy who took my statement wrote everything down without much expression, told me they'd look into it, and gave me a card. I never heard back from them, not once. I looked up the estate sale address a few months later, tried to find an obituary, some record of who had lived there. I found a brief listing, a man's name, age 43, no cause of death listed, no surviving family named. I still don't know what was on that wall. I don't know whose house was in those photos, or whether the person in those photos ever knew they were being watched, or whether any of this ever went anywhere beyond that sheriff's deputy's notepad. Most of us have a box somewhere, a drawer, a closet, an attic, full of things we never look at, things left behind by people who are gone. We tell ourselves we'll go through it someday. Most of the time, we never do. I wish I never did. My Uncle Harold passed in February of last year. No kids, never married, lived alone in rural Ohio for the last 30 years of his life. He was the kind of guy who kept to himself, friendly enough at holidays but quiet, the kind of quiet that feels deliberate, like he was always thinking about something he didn't want to say out loud. When he died, there was nobody else. I was the only family left, so the job of clearing out his house fell to me. I drove up on a Thursday, planning to spend the weekend sorting through whatever was there and then get back to my life in Columbus. The house wasn't in bad shape. A little dusty, a little cold, but not the disaster I was expecting. I worked through the kitchen, the bedroom, the living room. Most of it was ordinary. Old furniture, cheap dishes, a stack of Reader's Digest magazines going back to 1987. Nothing that told me anything I didn't already know about him. Then I went up to the attic. It was the last place I checked, and it was packed. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, plastic bins sealed with tape that had gone brittle with age, old tools hanging on pegboards along the walls. It smelled like sawdust and something else underneath it, something older. I started working through it methodically, one box at a time, and I was about 2 hours in when I found the camera. It was a camcorder, one of those old shoulder-mount VHS types from the late 80s or early 90s. Heavy, bulky, with a cracked rubber grip on the side. I almost put it in the donation pile without thinking twice. Then I noticed the tape. There was still a cassette loaded inside it. I don't know why that stopped me. It shouldn't have mattered. But something about knowing there was footage still sitting in that machine, unwatched, maybe for decades, it got under my skin. I set it aside and kept working. That night, back at my motel room, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I drove to a Walmart at 9 o'clock, found an adapter that would let me connect the old camcorder to a modern TV, and brought it back to the room. The battery was long dead, but the power cord still worked. I plugged it in. I pressed play. The first 20 minutes were nothing. A backyard I didn't recognize. A summer afternoon, trees in the background, somebody mowing a lawn a few houses down. Harold's voice behind the camera, narrating quietly. He was filming 2 kids playing in the yard, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 and 10 years old. I didn't recognize them. I had no idea who they were. That alone wasn't alarming. Maybe they were neighbor kids, maybe friends of a friend. I kept watching. Then the footage jumped. A different day. Same backyard, but later in the year the leaves had changed. And Harold was filming again. Same 2 kids. They were laughing, chasing each other around a plastic picnic table. And Harold's voice behind the camera said, quietly, almost to himself, "They don't know I'm here." I stopped the tape. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the paused screen. I told myself I'd misheard it. The audio on those old tapes was rough, distorted. I rewound. I played it again. "They don't know I'm here." I kept watching. I didn't want to, but I kept watching. There were more clips. Always kids, always filmed from a distance, through gaps in fences or from behind hedges, through the smudged window of a parked car. Different neighborhoods, different seasons, spanning what looked like years. Harold never showed his face. You could only hear his breathing, slow and steady, and sometimes that low murmur of a voice, commenting on what he was seeing. Most of what he said was mundane, describing what the kids were doing. Their clothes, the time of day. But then there were other things. Names. He knew some of their names. And there was one clip, I think it was toward the end of the tape, where he filmed a little girl getting off a school bus. And he said her name. And then he said the name of her street. He knew where she lived. I stopped the tape again. My hands were shaking. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and tried to think clearly. Harold was dead. Whatever he had done or not done, he was dead. The kids on that tape were adults now, if they were okay. I called the police the next morning. A detective came to the motel, watched portions of the footage, and took the camera. He didn't tell me much. He asked me how long Harold had lived in the area, whether I knew of any complaints, any incidents. I told him what I knew, which wasn't much. What he told me before he left was that this wasn't the first time they'd encountered something like this. That these situations, his word, situations, sometimes went on for years before anyone found out. And sometimes, he said carefully, they never found out at all. I drove back to Columbus that Sunday. I didn't finish clearing out the house. I hired a company to do it. I told them to throw everything away. Here's what I keep coming back to, the thing I can't shake. I knew Harold my whole life. Every holidays when my mom was still alive and we all still bothered. He sat at the same table as us, ate the same food, made small talk about football and the weather. He seemed like nothing. He seemed like just a quiet guy who kept to himself. And the whole time there was this other version of him, documented on tape, hidden in a box in an attic, waiting for someone to find it. I don't know if the detective ever identified the kids on that tape. I've called twice to ask and got nothing beyond case is ongoing. I don't know how many tapes there were before the one I found. I don't know if there were others after it. That camera was sitting in that attic for years. Harold walked past it every time he went up there. He chose to keep it. He chose to keep all of it. And if I hadn't gone up there, if I'd hired someone from the start, if they'd thrown it all out without looking, that tape would have ended up in a landfill somewhere. And nobody would have ever known. If any of these three stories made you stop and think twice about something ordinary in your life, an old object, a forgotten place, hit that like button and subscribe to Mr. Terrifying for more horror stories, and share this video with someone who loves horror stories. Until next time, stay safe out there.